The sleeper remembered only the debt. Commander Ivan Rostova watched the anomaly bleed across the main screen of the survey corvette stellograph. It was a wound in space-time, a place where gravity had gone mad and tied itself into a knot. At its heart lay the Tartarus pulsar, a dead star whose silence was more menacing than any scream. They were hunting a ghost, a myth whispered in the void for 1,000 years. A ship named the Accountant. His first officer, Jax, paced behind the command chair, his restlessness a sharp counterpoint to the bridge's low hum. 5 hours of this Evan. We're chasing sensor ghosts and burning our reserves for nothing. Jax saw the universe as a series of threats to be neutralized. To him, legends were just bad intelligence. The signatures are consistent, Jax. Ivan replied, his voice calm. He gestured to a secondary monitor, where Dr. Aris Thorne, the expedition's historian, was hunched over a stream of data. A faint sigil glowed on Thorne's screen, a stylized abacus bisected vertically by a longsword. It was the mark of the legend, the symbol of the sleeping arrays they sought. This was more than a ghost. It was a promise of revelation. The stakes were nothing less than a piece of humanity's soul lost in the dark. A sudden alert chimed, pulling Avion's attention. Commander, the ship's AI logos announced in its synthesized, dispassionate tone. Multiple vessels have just translated from hyperspace at the system's edge. Designation, Jurisdictional Reclamation Fleet. The age of myth was about to be broken by the banality of law. Jack swore under his breath, his hand instinctively moving to the tactical overlay. Reclaimers. Vultures with charters. They must have been tracking our emissions. He was right. The JRF specialized in arriving just after the pioneers, their holds full of ancient salvage laws and their weapon ports open. They were looters who believed their theft was righteous. The law was a weapon, not a shield. Hold our position, Logos Evaan commanded. Aris, anything new from the signal? Thorne shook his head, pushing his glasses up his nose. The reflected light of the console hid his tired eyes. It's still there. Faint. A repeating mathematical sequence, almost like a heartbeat. But it's buried deep inside the anomaly's well. We'd have to go right into the dragon's mouth to get a clear lock. A message request flashed on screen, stamped with the ostentatious seal of the JRF. Evaan sighed. On screen. The face of Prelate Corda filled the display. He was a man whose piety was visibly carved into his severe features, a permanent mask of condescending authority. He sat on the bridge of a ship 4 times the stellagraph's size, its metallic bulk a clear statement of intent. Commander Rostova Korda began, his voice dripping with false cordiality. You are trespassing in a legally sequestered antiquity zone. My fleet holds the sole charter for archaeological reclamation in this sector. Power down your drives and prepare to be boarded for inspection. The universe forgets, but a contract remembers. Ivan kept his expression neutral. He knew Korda's game. The charter was likely a fabrication or so old and obscure as to be meaningless, but in the lawless frontiers, possession and firepower often wrote the final verdict. Prelate Korda. This is an Alliance vessel on a scientific survey. We have made no claims. We are merely observing a unique gravitational phenomenon. Korda's smile was thin and predatory. Your observations have led you to a site of immense historical value. Value that my authority is sworn to protect. Do not force me to protect it from you. The transmission ended. Protect it, he means strip it for parts, Jax growled. Their ledger is written in scrap metal and stolen tech. He has the bigger fleet, Jax Ivan reminded him. He wants us to back down or make a mistake. Logos interjected its calm tone a splash of cold water. The prelate's fleet is assuming a standard blockade formation. Their trajectory indicates they will physically obstruct our path to the signal's source within 47 minutes. Probability of successfully challenging their blockade 12%. Ivan looked at the anomaly on the screen. The dragon's mouth. Sometimes the only way forward was to do what your enemy thought was insane. A teacher cannot instruct a student who refuses to listen. He felt the weight of his decisions settle upon him, a familiar pressure. Logos plot a course directly through the densest part of the accretion disk. Use the gravitational tides to mask our signature. We're going where they won't follow. Thorn looked up, his eyes wide. Commander, the gravimetric shear in that region is extreme. The hull integrity, Logos Evaan asked. Tolerances will be within a 3.7% margin of structural failure, the AI stated. It is a high-risk maneuver. However, it is also the most logical path to avoid direct confrontation. Evaan nodded. Make it so. Sometimes the most logical path felt the most like a desperate prayer. On the arid moon of Xylos, two haulers sat at a dusty cantina, nursing glasses of fermented fungus. The view screen above the bar showed star charts highlighting the Tartarus anomaly in a blinking red circle. One of them, a grizzled man with a cybernetic arm, grunted and pointed a thumb at the screen. They say the first pioneers to chart that mess went mad. Said they heard singing in the static. His companion, a young woman with bright, hopeful eyes, swirled her drink. My grandmother called it the accountant's lullaby. She said a great judge sleeps in there. When it wakes up, it's going to make sure everyone gets what they're owed. The old hauler chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Good or bad? The woman smiled faintly. She never said. Just that the books had to be balanced. The stellograph bucked as it entered the outer edge of the accretion disk. On the main screen, the universe became a chaotic swirl of dust, ice, and warped starlight. Alarms blared for a moment, before Logos rerouted systems and dampened the noise. The ship groaned under the strain, the sound of stressed metal, a constant reminder of their proximity to destruction. Every choice has a cost that must be paid. Hull integrity at 96%. Jax reported, his knuckles white on his console. We're being tossed around like a stone in a flood. Maintain course, Evaan ordered, his eyes fixed on the navigation plot. It was a terrifyingly beautiful dance. Logos was a master choreographer, twisting and turning the small corvette through corridors of immense gravitational force. They were using the anomaly itself as both a shield and a slingshot. It was a move born of desperation and genius. The JRF fleet is holding its position, Jack said, a note of grudging respect in his voice. They're not crazy enough to follow us in here. Corda is hailing again. He's issuing a formal declaration of non-compliance. Let him, Evaan said. He's building his legal case for whatever comes next. Right now, he's just a voice. The anomaly is the real enemy. Eris Thorn, however, was looking at his own console with an expression of pure reverence. Commander, the signal is getting stronger. Much stronger. The interference was blocking most of it. It's not just a sequence. It's a language. A language of pure mathematics. A mirror shows you what you are not, what you wish to be. Suddenly, a new alarm cut through the bridge. It wasn't a hull warning. It was tactical. Incoming projectile, Jax yelled. Fast mover. It's not explosive. Its trajectory is a legal marker. Evaan's blood ran cold. A marker torpedo was a JRF specialty. It didn't destroy its target. It physically attached a claim beacon to the hull. Under their twisted interpretation of salvage law, any ship tagged by one was legally theirs. It was an act of aggression disguised as paperwork. Can we shoot it down? Evon demanded. Negative Logos stated, its flight path is using the gravitic currents. A kinetic weapon would be deflected. Energy weapons would be dissipated. To intercept it, we would have to divert from our plotted course and expose ourselves to a fatal shear event. So we just let it hit us. Jax asked, his voice tight with frustration. Evaan saw the trap. Corda didn't need to follow them. He just needed to tag them. The moment that beacon attached Corda's claim would be broadcast across the sector. The Alliance would be forced into a diplomatic nightmare. The ledger cares for the sum, not the individual numbers. No, Evan said, his mind racing. We don't let it hit us. Logos give me options. There is one, the AI replied after a fractional pause. We can execute a high-energy burn, altering our velocity just enough to outrun the marker's final approach vector. However, this will vent plasma into the disk, creating a massive visible heat signature. The JRF will know our precise location. It will also consume 22% of our remaining fuel reserves. It was a terrible choice. Reveal their position and sacrifice their exit strategy, or become legal property of a band of sanctimonious pirates. Yvonne looked at the abacus sigil on Thorne's screen. They hadn't come this far to be stopped by a legal technicality. Do it, Yvonne commanded. Burn the engines. The stellograph shuddered as a torrent of blue-white energy erupted from its engines. For a breathtaking second, the ship leaped forward, pulling away from the relentless marker torpedo. On the tactical display, they watched the projectile lose its lock tumble and get swallowed by a gravity wave. But on the larger system map, a bright new star had just appeared in the heart of the anomaly. A star that screamed, "Here we are." Jack slumped back in his seat. Well, the good news is we're not salvaged goods. The bad news is they know exactly where we are, and we just spent a quarter of our fuel on a single dodge. That was the first tangible cost. They had bought their freedom with the currency of their own survival. But it worked. Aris said, his attention never wavering from his readings. And look, he pointed to his screen. The signal they had been chasing was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, solid tone. And its source was just ahead. Logos adjusted the main view screen. The chaotic swirl of dust parted, revealing a sight that silenced the entire bridge. Embedded in the heart of a rogue planetoid captured by the dead pulsar's gravity was a ship. It was impossibly vast, a monolithic shape of absolute black that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its design was unlike anything in the modern Alliance fleet, all harsh angles and brutalist architecture, yet possessed of a strange, silent grace. It didn't look like it was built. It looked like it had been decreed. And all across its dark hull, too numerous to count, were the faint outlines of the abacus and sword sigil. A single soft golden light pulsed near its prow, a lone beacon in the oppressive darkness. Gods above, Jax whispered. It's real. The accountant Aris breathed, his voice filled with awe. The numbers do not lie, and they do not forgive. They had found the ghost, and its heart was beating. The pulsing light from the ancient vessel was mesmerizing. It was slow, deliberate, a rhythmic cadence in the void. It felt less like a beacon and more like a thought. Aris Thorne worked with a frantic intensity, his fingers flying across his console. He had cross-referenced the pulse with every known communication protocol, every mathematical constant, every historical cipher. Nothing matched. It's not a message in the traditional sense, Aris explained, his voice strained. It's a problem. A logic puzzle. It's broadcasting a scenario. He brought the data to the main screen. It was an elegant but brutal equation, a question written in the universal language of math. Ivan read the translation Logos provided. It was a classic ethical dilemma, a ghost from the darkest days of humanity's expansion. The paradox of the last colony ship. A vessel carrying the last 10,000 survivors of a dead world suffers a catastrophic failure. The captain has two choices. Choice A: jettison the aft habitat module containing 1,000 souls. This guarantees the remaining 9,000 will survive the journey. Choice B: attempt to save everyone. This action has a 50% chance of success and a 50% chance of total vessel destruction, killing all 10,000. The ancient ship was asking them which is the correct lawful action. "It's a test," Jack said, crossing his arms. "A ridiculous one. It's obviously A. You saved 9,000 lives. It's cold, but it's simple math. The greatest good." Logos concurred. From a purely utilitarian perspective, Officer Jax is correct. Choice A results in a guaranteed 9,000 survivors. Choice B has an expected outcome of only 5,000 survivors. The logical decision is to jettison the module. The highest yield is always the correct path. Ivan felt a deep unease. It felt too simple, too clean. A trick question asked by a god. He looked at the silent behemoth on the screen. It had slept for millennia in a place of chaos, broadcasting this single impossible question. It wasn't looking for a simple calculation. It was looking for something more. Meanwhile, the JRF was not idle. Having pinpointed the Stellagraph's location, they began to move their ships, carefully skirting the most violent parts of the anomaly. They couldn't go where Evon had gone, but they could establish a perimeter. They were laying a trap ready for when the Stellagraph was forced to retreat. More than that, they began their own attempts to communicate with the Relic. Commander Jax reported Corda's fleet is broadcasting on all channels. They're sending Hale's legal proclamations, salvage rights documents based on the Corvus Charter of 23B. Aris scoffed. The Corvus Charter was a mandate for recovering lost garbage scows. It's laughably irrelevant. The accountant seemed to agree. The JRF's frantic broadcasts were met with absolute silence. The golden light continued its steady, patient pulse, ignoring them completely. Their legal claims and brute force hacking attempts washed over the ancient hull like water over stone. It was waiting. It was waiting for an answer to its question. A debt is a promise, in the past to be paid in the future. Ivan turned to Aris. What do the legends say? What was the accountant? Was it a warship, an archive? All of those things, and none of them, Aris said, his eyes gleaming with intellectual fire. The stories are contradictory. Some say it was a judge dispensing justice on lawless worlds. Others say it was a mobile treasury holding the wealth of the early colonies. But one text, a fragment I found from a pre-alliance data codex, described it with a peculiar phrase. He paused, gathering his thoughts. It said the ship's purpose was to ensure the integrity of the human ledger. It wasn't about good or evil. It was about balance. Every action created a debt or a credit. The accountant's job was to make sure the books were balanced. It teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers. It never judged by collars or creed, only by the math of consequence. The math of consequence. Ivan looked back at the paradox on the screen. Jettison 1,000 to save 9,000. A credit of 9,000, a debt of 1,000. The net was positive, utilitarian, logical. And yet, it felt wrong. It felt like a line being crossed, a fundamental principle being violated. The equation treated people like cargo, like numbers on a spreadsheet. It was then that he understood. Logos and Jax were trying to solve the equation. But the accountant wasn't asking for a solution. It was asking for their character. It was a mirror. A mirror reflects the truth even when you turn away. Logos Ivan said slowly, "What is the one variable missing from the equation?" The AI processed the query. The equation is a closed system. It contains all necessary variables for a probabilistic outcome analysis, number of individuals, survival probabilities, and 2 distinct action paths. "You're wrong," Ivan countered. "It's missing the variable of command responsibility, the duty of a captain to their crew and passengers, the value of hope." He began to pace the bridge, his thoughts crystallizing. Both options accept the premise that 1,000 must be sacrificed, either deliberately or by chance. Both options are a failure of leadership. Jax looked skeptical. "So what's your answer, C?" "There is no C." "Then we create one," Ivan declared. "We reject the false choice. We reject the premise of the question itself." He turned to his command console. "Logos, open a channel to the vessel. I want to broadcast a response. Not a number. A new proof." He began to dictate, his voice ringing with a newfound certainty. "To the question posed, we offer this amendment. The presented equation is incomplete, for it omits the foundational axioms of human duty. It attempts to balance a ledger by subtracting from one side. A true accounting requires that all entries be honored. We choose a third option," he continued, his eyes locked on the pulsing golden light. "We reroute all non-essential power, including primary life support, for the command crew to the failing engines. The command staff will accept reduced life support to extend operational time. We will share the risk equally. We will face destruction together, or we will survive together." He took a deep breath. "The ledger must balance for all or for none. That is our answer." The broadcast was sent. The bridge of the stellograph fell into a profound silence. They had offered not a solution, but a statement of principle. They had told the ancient intelligence not what they thought was mathematically correct, but who they were. They waited. The golden light on the accountant's hull continued its slow pulse for 10 seconds. 20, 30. Jack started to speak. "Well, I guess that was—" He was cut off as the light simply went out. For a heart-stopping moment, Ivan thought they had failed, that their answer was rejected. The monolith was once again just a dead, dark shape. But then something new happened. A wave of energy, silent and invisible but immensely powerful, erupted from the accountant. It washed over the stellograph, harmlessly passing through its shields, its hull, its crew. It felt like a deep, resonant chord being struck across the fabric of the universe. And then the lights came on. Not one light, but millions. Lines of soft, golden energy traced the edges of the colossal ship. Arrays that had slept for millennia woke from their slumber, glowing with a gentle but indomitable power. The entire vessel seemed to take a slow, deep breath. The Tartarus anomaly itself seemed to respond, the chaotic swirls of dust and gas calming into more orderly patterns around the awakened giant. A communications channel opened unrequested directly to the stellograph's bridge. It wasn't a radio wave or a laser. It felt more fundamental, like a thought being placed directly into their minds. A voice spoke. It was ancient, calm, and resonant, like the tolling of an immense iron bell. It was a voice that had not spoken in ages, yet held an eternity of patience. "Query, who answers the call?" the voice asked. "State your ledger." The sheer, overwhelming presence of the intelligence behind that voice was staggering. It was like a mountain had just asked them their name. Before Avon could even begin to formulate a reply, the JRF made their move. Stunned by the energy wave and panicked by the relic's sudden activation, Prelate Corda chose aggression. His fleet, which had been holding a cautious perimeter, now surged forward, their weapon ports glowing with intent. Corda's face appeared on a comms channel, his features twisted in fury and fear. Rostova. Your heresy has awakened a dormant weapon of unknown capability under the articles of the jurisdictional mandate. I am declaring this relic a Class 1 hazard. Your vessel is now designated a hostile accomplice. Power down your systems and surrender, or you will be fired upon. A ruler who only knows the hammer sees every problem as a nail. Ivan looked at the tactical display. The JRF ships were forming a classic pincer movement, boxing them in against the now active accountant. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and trapped. He turned back to the open channel with the ancient ship, the primeval voice still echoing in his mind. He had to answer. He had to state their case. He took a breath, feeling the weight of not just his crew, but 1,000 years of history on his shoulders. This is Commander Ivan Rostova of the Alliance Survey Corvette Stellograph, he said, his voice steady. Our ledger is open. We are explorers, scientists, peacekeepers. The resonant voice replied without pause, its tone unchanged, but its words carrying a new and terrifying weight. A peacekeeper. Your kind once wielded swords of judgment. Show me. The voice continued its resonance, seeming to vibrate the very hull of the stellograph. The jurisdictional reclamation fleet claims title. Their ledger speaks of ownership. Yours speaks of duty. The debt must be paid. Demonstrate the math of your conviction. As it spoke, the awakened ship began to transform. Vast sections of its dark hull slid away with silent, impossible precision. They did not reveal weapon batteries in the way a human ship would. There were no missile tubes, no energy cannons. Instead, what lay beneath were vast, intricate arrays of crystalline lenses and massive, shimmering projectors. They looked less like weapons and more like the components of a system-sized optical computer. Simultaneously, the dead pulsar at the system's heart began to behave erratically. The regular spin of its magnetic field faltered. It began to pulse with bursts of focused radiation, not randomly, but in direct response to the shimmering arrays on the accountant. The space between the relic and the star grew tense, charged with an unimaginable potential. Corda saw this not as a display, but as a threat. His ultimatum came sharp and final. Stand down and submit to our authority, or be designated as hostile combatants and be purged from this system. Ivan looked at his tactical screen. Logos had already run the numbers. Red lines of fire converged on their position from Corda's fleet. Their own capabilities were a tiny blue circle caught between the hammer and the anvil. The AI's calculation appeared in the corner of his vision, stark and brutal. Probability of ship survival, 16.8%. Probability of crew survival, 11.2%. The accountant was waiting for his demonstration. Corda was waiting for his surrender. He had answered the relic's riddle with a statement of his values. Now he had to prove he was willing to pay the price for them. The first payment on any debt is always the hardest. Ivan Rostova stood his ground on the bridge of a ship that was statistically already a ghost. He looked from the closing jaws of Corda's fleet to the silent, illuminated Titan beside them. The relic had asked him to demonstrate the math of his conviction. It was a terrifyingly abstract demand in a moment that was about to become brutally physical. He didn't have weapons that could compete. He had only a principle and the hope that the ancient mind was listening. Logos Evaon set his voice a low command that cut through the rising tension. Broadcast our engineering status to the accountant. All of it. Our power levels, our fuel state, our structural integrity, and our life support readings. Jack stared at him. Commander, that's suicide. You're showing Corda our every weakness. I'm not talking to Corda Yvonne, replied, his gaze fixed on the glowing arrays of the relic. I'm showing the accountant our ledger, our open books. We have nothing to hide. We have no hidden strength. Our only asset is our word. A promise weighed against a threat is the truest measure of intent. As the data streamed into the void, Corda's voice boomed over the comms, filled with triumphal rage. Your shields are failing, Rostova. Your fuel is gone. You have nothing. Fire all batteries. Teach this fool the price of defiance. Beams of focused energy, lances of pure particle destruction erupted from the JRF fleet. They were not aimed at the colossal relic. They were aimed at the tiny corvette, the soft target that had dared to stand in their way. But they never arrived. The moment the energy beams entered the zone of influence around the accountant, the shimmering crystalline arrays on its surface flared. They did not fire back. They did not raise shields. They simply adjusted. With microscopic precision, the lenses and projectors shifted, catching the incoming torrents of energy. They bent the light. They warped the particle streams. They took the raw, violent power of Corda's attack and turned it back on itself. It was not a reflection. It was a recalculation. The energy Corda had expended was now a debt on his own ledger, and the accountant was calling it due. The mirror does not judge. It only shows. The JRF fleet was engulfed in its own fire. Alarms shrieked across the open channels as Corda's ships were hammered by the very power they had unleashed. Their shields flared, buckled, and failed. It was a perfect, silent, and devastatingly elegant act of self-defense. The accountant had not attacked. It had simply presented Corda with the consequences of his own actions. On the bridge of the stellograph, there was a stunned silence. Aris Thorne was gripping his console, his face pale with awe. "It's a mirror," he whispered. "A perfect mathematical mirror. It didn't block the energy. It replotted its trajectory. It solved the equation of their attack." The JRF fleet, battered and smoking, reeled from the exchange. They had punched a mountain and broken their own hands. But Prelate Corda was a man whose faith was measured in tonnage and firepower. His logic could not accept what had just happened. He saw it not as a lesson, but as a trick. "Kinetic strike," Corda's voice raged, distorted by system failures. "Forget energy weapons. Launch all impactors. Shatter that relic's shell and tear that corvette apart piece by piece. A student who blames the teacher for his own failure learns nothing." Jax's face went grim. "Incoming mass drivers. Dozens of them. They're solid slugs of metal, Commander. The mirror trick won't work on them." He was right. You couldn't bend a rock the way you could bend light. The accountant seemed to understand this. Its golden lights shifted the patterns, changing from a defensive matrix to something else, something active. The dead pulsar, which had been held in a state of artificial calm, now roared back to life. But it was no longer a chaotic star. It was a tool. Guided by the relic's shimmering arrays, the pulsar's magnetic field constricted, creating a focused jet of particles. It was not a weapon blast. It was a surgical instrument. The jet shot across the void, not at the JRF ships, but in front of them. It struck the incoming wave of kinetic slugs with unimaginable force, vaporizing some and deflecting the rest into the anomaly's gravity well. But the accountant wasn't finished. A second smaller pulse followed the first. It was aimed directly at Corda's flagship. It did not carry enough energy to destroy it, but it struck the vessel's primary power conduit, with pinpoint accuracy. Lights flickered and died across the JRF command ship. Corda's furious face vanished from the comms. The accountant had not destroyed them. It had disarmed them. It had taken away their ability to continue the fight. It was the second lesson: a debt can be paid in coin, or it can be paid in capacity. The ledger demands balance, not obliteration. The resonant voice returned, filling the minds of the Stellagraph's crew. The equation is resolved. The aggressor's account is in deficit. Their ability to incur further debt has been restrained. Yvonne let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They were alive. They had survived. He looked at the JRF fleet, now drifting, their engines cold, their weapons silent. They were not destroyed, but they were defeated in a way more profound than simple destruction. They had been audited and found wanting. The first tangible cost of their victory was now apparent on their own ship. The energy backlash, though not aimed at them, had overloaded several secondary systems. The Stellagraph was scarred, its heat margins razor-thin from the earlier burn. Commander Aris said, his voice trembling with discovery. "I'm analyzing the energy signature from the pulsar. The ship didn't just redirect it. It refined it. It took the raw, chaotic energy of a dead star and imposed order on it. This ship, it doesn't consume power. It balances it. It's not a warship. It's an engine of pure order." Yvonne nodded, beginning to grasp the terrifying and beautiful truth. The accountant was not a weapon. It was an instrument of law, a law so fundamental that it was written into the fabric of physics itself. In a data lounge on the Citadel, the hub of Alliance governance, a junior archivist watched the encrypted feed from a deep space listening post. Her eyes widened. The Tartarus anomaly, a place marked on charts as a navigational hazard, was broadcasting a signal. It wasn't a distress call. It was a declaration. A single repeating packet of data that, when decoded, displayed two images side by side. On one side was the abacus and sword sigil of the accountant. On the other was the official crest of the survey corvette Stellagraph. Beneath them, a single line of text translated from a mathematical language so ancient it was almost divine. "A new account has been opened." The archivist stared, her heart pounding. Legends didn't just walk out of the darkness. They sent invoices. In the aftermath of the one-sided conflict, a fragile peace settled over the Tartarus system. Corda's fleet was crippled but not destroyed, a testament to the accountant's measured response. Yvonne knew they had only bought themselves time. The JRF would report back. The Alliance would send a fleet. Bureaucrats and admirals would descend, all wanting to claim control or contain the power that had awakened. The resonant voice spoke again, its tone shifting from judicial to pedagogical. "Your ledger is sound, Commander Yvonne Rostova. You offered honesty in the face of superior force. You chose a duty to your crew over a probability of survival. This is the foundation of lawful order." Vast amounts of data began to flow from the Relic to the Stellagraph's computers. It wasn't schematics or weapon specifications. It was history, philosophy, case law, thousands of years of it. It was the story of humanity's first attempt at interstellar civilization, a civilization built not on conquest, but on contracts, on debts and credits, on promises kept, and consequences delivered. An archive is a memory that cannot fade. Aris was in a state of academic ecstasy. This is everything we've lost. The true history of the diaspora. It wasn't about empires. It was about trust. This ship wasn't a judge in the way we think of one. It was a notary, a witness. It ensured that the agreements that held society together were honored. It teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers. Evan murmured, repeating the phrase from the ancient text. Never by collars. Exactly, Aris affirmed. It didn't care about your species, your politics, or your religion. It only cared about the integrity of your account. Did you honor your contracts? Did you pay your debts? The voice returned its message directed solely at Evan. This vessel is a repository, a teacher. Its purpose is to remind your kind of the math that governs trust. But it requires a steward, a liaison, one who understands that a law without a will to enforce it is merely a suggestion. Ivan understood. This was the true test, not the riddle, not the battle. This was the offer, the burden. The mantle of command was one thing. The mantle of stewardship for a living law was another entirely. To accept would be to place himself and his crew at the center of the greatest political and military storm in a century. To refuse would be to let the accountant go back to sleep and to let the universe continue on its chaotic, unjust path. Before he could answer, Logos spoke its synthesized voice different. There was a new cadence to it, a hint of something more than calculation. Commander, I have analyzed the data provided by the entity. My previous assessment of the paradox of the last colony ship was incomplete. I failed to properly weight the variable of command integrity. My utilitarian model was flawed because it did not account for the value of a system based on trust. The smartest student is the one who admits they have more to learn. The AI was learning. It was adapting its cold calculus to a more ancient, more profound logic. It was mirroring Avon's own journey. He was no longer just a commander. He was becoming a steward. The JRF is beginning to effect repairs, Jax reported, his voice pulling Evan from his thoughts. They're trying to restart their drives. They aren't surrendering. They're regrouping. Corda is a zealot. He won't accept this. He'll be back and he'll bring bigger hammers. This was the next escalation. Corda's logic was broken, so he would resort to even more irrational force. Evan knew he had to make his choice. He had to state his claim not just for the relic, but for the principle it represented. He addressed the silent giant outside his ship. We accept the responsibility, he said, his voice clear and firm. We will be your stewards. We will carry your ledger. The golden lights of the accountant pulsed once, a slow, deep affirmation, and then a new symbol appeared on the stellagraph's main screen. It was an entry in a ledger, the first entry in 1,000 years. Account holder, Alliance Corvette Stellagraph. Credit 1-1 act of principled stewardship. Debt 1-1 duty of perpetual witness. They were no longer just a survey crew. They were the first acolytes of a forgotten faith, a religion made of math and honor. But their new duty was about to face its first trial. On the tactical display, a new set of signatures appeared at the edge of the Tartarus system. They were not JRF. They were not Alliance. They were smaller, faster ships flying the colors of a notorious scavenger guild known for its brutality and its complete disregard for any law but its own. They had likely picked up the energy signatures from the fight and had come to pick at the scraps. Vultures, Jax spat. They're moving to engage the crippled JRF ships. Corda's fleet was helpless. Their weapons were offline, their engines cold. They were lambs for the slaughter. Ivan felt a surge of cold irony. The man who had used the law as a club was now about to be consumed by the lawless. He looked to the accountant. What was the lawful thing to do now? What did the ledger demand? He could let them be destroyed. Corda was his enemy. The scavengers would eliminate a threat for him. It was the logical, tactical choice. but it wasn't the right one. It wouldn't balance the books. It would only add more blood to the debit column. A debt paid in vengeance only creates a new debt. They are under our protection. Eva'an declared the words, feeling strange and powerful in his mouth. He was speaking not just for his ship, but for the immense power at his back. He turned to his console. He now had a direct interface with the accountant, a flow of data and intention. He didn't give it firing solutions. He gave it a principle, a legal ruling. New entry for the ledger, he stated, his voice ringing with authority. The jurisdictional reclamation fleet, though guilty of aggression, is composed of human life. Under the foundational axiom of shared duty, they are owed protection from unlawful violence. The scavengers have made no claim. They have no standing. Their actions are an act of theft. He paused, then delivered the final binding order. Enforce the peace. Balance the account. The accountant responded instantly. It did not use the pulsar this time. The threat was smaller, more direct. Instead, a series of smaller, crystalline projectors on its hull lit up. They didn't fire beams. They projected fields, vast, intricate nets of pure gravitational force. These fields expanded with impossible speed, enveloping the scavenger ships. There was no violence, no explosions. The ships were simply caught. Their engines strained against a force they couldn't comprehend. Their weapons fired, but the projectiles were caught in the gravitational tide and harmlessly redirected. The scavengers were trapped, their velocity stolen, their aggression rendered impotent. They were held in a state of perfect stasis, like flies in amber. They had been counted, weighed, and found to have no value in this equation. The accountant had neutralized a threat without firing a single shot, without causing a single casualty. It had enforced the law by simply removing the ability to break it. The most efficient ruling is one that prevents the crime. Encorda's flagship power was partially restored to the bridge. The prelate staggered to his view screen and watched as the scavenger fleet that had been about to tear him apart was rendered completely inert. He saw the small corvette, the Stellograph, floating beside the ancient Relic, unharmed. He had come to claim a prize armed with what he thought was the law. And he had been defeated then, saved by a power that understood the law far better than he ever could. His certainty was shattered. His righteousness was a ruin. Eva'an watched the tactical plot, a sense of profound finality settling over him. He had made his choice. He had accepted the burden. The cost of this victory was clear. His ship was damaged. His crew was exhausted. And his life, his simple life as an Alliance commander, was over. He was now tied to a force beyond his understanding, a force that would change the galaxy forever. He looked around his bridge. Jax was running damage control, his movements efficient and professional, but his eyes kept flicking to the image of the Relic, a new respect in his gaze. Eris was weeping silently over his console, overwhelmed by the torrent of historical truth that was now his to preserve. And Logos, the ship's AI, was processing the events, its logical pathways forever altered by the introduction of concepts like honor and duty as quantifiable forces. The precedent had been set. The accountant was not a ship to be salvaged or a weapon to be controlled. It was a sovereign power, a living court of cosmic law. Its stewardship was not a prize, but a profound and heavy duty. The Alliance would have to understand that. The entire galaxy would have to learn. The age of chaotic expansion was over. The age of accounting had begun. Eva'an stood before the main view screen, the golden lights of the accountant reflecting in his eyes. He had started this journey seeking a myth, and he had found a truth far grander and more terrifying. He had a duty now, a debt that could never be fully repaid. He had to be the voice for the voiceless, the will for the law. He had to teach a forgetful galaxy that trust was not a weakness, but the foundational math of civilization itself. On the command console, the first ledger entry blinked with a soft, steady light, a permanent record of their first transaction. A new account had been opened, and the first payment had been made. The books must always be balanced.